Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. In a week that saw Prime Minister Anthony Albanese finally announce the wording of the Voice referendum that will appear on the ballot later this year, Labor's primary support dropped 2% to 35.5%. Coalition support was unchanged at 32%, with a big others vote of 32.5%. On a two-party preferred basis, the Federal Labor Party still enjoys a huge lead on 57%, compared to the Coalition on only 43%, although the lead is down 2 percentage points from a week ago. Of real concern, though, will be this week's drop in the Roy Morgan Government Confidence Indicator, which fell 9 points to 87, to its lowest since the Albanese government's election last year. More Australians now say the country is heading in the wrong direction, 48%, up 4.5% just from a week ago, than say the country's heading in the right direction, 35%, down 4.5%. And in New South Wales, we had a closely fought election with the ALP and Labor leader Chris Minns emerging victorious, although the size of that victory is yet to be determined. There's also continuing concern with regards to consumer confidence, virtually unchanged this week at 76.6, but consumer confidence has now spent 4 weeks below 80 for the first time since the start of the pandemic, and it's averaged only 77.5 during this period. At the start of the pandemic, when none of us knew what was happening, consumer confidence averaged only 71.9 during the first weeks in March and April 2020. Inflation expectations. Well, overall, inflation expectations were down 0.5% to 5.4% this week, back in line with recent averages. Inflation expectations have averaged 5.4% over 12 weeks so far this year. This suggests Australians believe inflation has peaked and is coming down. The next ABS inflation reading for the month of February, that's CPI for February, is due out later this week. And this monthly reading will have a big impact on what the Reserve Bank decides to do next week, whether they'll raise interest rates for a record 11th straight meeting. If the ABS inflation reading continues to fall in February, that will add to pressure for the Reserve Bank to pause their interest rate rises. However, despite similar signs of softening inflation overseas, both the Federal Reserve in the US and the Bank of England both continued to raise interest rates last week. The largest impact of the interest rate increases has unsurprisingly and consistently been felt by Australians paying off their mortgage. Despite a small recovery this week, people paying off their home, mortgagees, have clearly the lowest consumer confidence of any group at only 72.6. So we at Roy Morgan have been watching the mortgage market really carefully as the consumer confidence of those with mortgages dropped in response to increasing interest rates. And there's a good reason why. Mortgage stress is on the rise. Roy Morgan is the only company that measures mortgage stress every month, and the latest Roy Morgan mortgage stress figures are out for February 2023, and the news is not good. Over a quarter of all mortgage holders, in fact 25.3%, are now considered at risk of mortgage stress. This is the highest rate for over a decade, since June 2012. In addition, and even more concerningly, almost 1 in 6 mortgage holders are now considered extremely at risk, 15.7% of all mortgage holders. This figure is equivalent to 735,000 people with mortgage. These figures are concerning enough, but the prospect of further interest rate increases next week and perhaps in May as well will increase these figures significantly. Roy Morgan's able to forecast the level of mortgage stress in the months ahead based on projected interest rate increases. Essentially, we assume everything else is equal and look at the impact on individual mortgage holders of these interest rate increases. We find if the Reserve Bank decides to increase interest rates by 0.25% next week, this would have a significant impact on mortgage stress, increasing the number to over 1.45 million mortgage holders at risk, or 28.8% of all mortgage holders. An additional interest rate increase of 0.25% in May would increase this to well over 1.5 million mortgage holders. That's a record high, the highest number ever of mortgage holders that are at risk of mortgage stress. These factors should be on the Reserve Bank's mind as it meets to consider another increase to interest rates next week, especially if other indicators, like Roy Morgan's Inflation Expectations Index, show inflationary pressures in the economy are reducing. So the New South Wales election. Australia's largest state of New South Wales went to the polls on the weekend, and opposition leader Chris Minns has led the ALP back into government in New South Wales after 12 years of coalition government. This means there are wall-to-wall Labor governments on the Australian mainland, and only Tasmania still has a Liberal-led government. Although the Labor's election victory is assured, the party has yet to secure a majority of 47 seats in the 93-seat parliament. For the poll watchers, the latest results from the New South Wales Electoral Commission show the ALP on 54% compared to the Coalition on 46% on a two-party preferred basis, and late counting is favouring the Coalition, as usual. So the final result is trending towards matching the final Roy Morgan poll of the New South Wales electorate that showed the ALP on 53.5 and the Coalition on 46.5 on a two-party preferred basis. Roy Morgan most accurate again. If this is the final result, the ALP is also likely to fall just short of securing a majority of seats in Parliament. The ALP currently holds 45 seats, but needs to find 2 more for the majority. We won't know for sure if the ALP has gained a majority for several days, even perhaps a couple of weeks, as postal votes continue to trickle into the Electoral Commission in some key close seats. The result does, however, support the accuracy of Roy Morgan's Snap SMS polls. Roy Morgan was also the most accurate in last year's Victorian election. The final Roy Morgan Snap SMS poll of Victorian electors in the week before the Victorian election predicted a comfortable ALP victory, with the ALP on 55% to the Coalition on 45%, and that was exactly in line with the final result, the closest forecast of any published poll prior to the Victorian election. And that's a wrap for this week. Subscribe free to our Roy Morgan YouTube channel for all the latest political, economic and market research data and insights. Thanks for listening today, and I look forward to bringing you the latest data next week on consumer confidence, inflation expectations and voting intention. Take care and see you next Tuesday.